set up. We got to
Oh, look at that part. Yes. Oh, I got it. I'll be right back. Okay.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
I know.
How you doing?
I'm good. How's it going? It's been at least 4 or 5 days.
I know.
It's easy,
I
right?
know. Look, I got filled with clay
Oh, look at you.
on this one.
Yeah.
And I don't mind using the thing. Can we just share that one?
Well, people speak simultaneously, and I don't know. I do like having people have separate mics. Yeah. It's
I
also.
always like
Do you
having
want me to put
my
it on?
mic, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's nice having your.
Okay, I'll just. Can I just hold it like this?
Just don't hold it forward. Don't hold
Okay.
it that way. Let it feedback.
Yeah, no problem. I got it.
When you're not speaking, you can just turn it to mute.
No, that's fine because I'm
Yeah.
gonna forget it.
Yeah.
It's right now.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like when you're. Yeah.
Test. Yeah, you can hear yourself.
Okay.
I just don't need everything like I ever say recorded.
So I think I'm moderating.
Oh, what? Yeah, there's nothing we have moderators. So.
No, did you hear it? So Thomas, his grandma died.
Oh no, I didn't know. This has had some family issues.
Yeah,
That's too bad.
that's okay. I'm gonna kind of moderate this. Hello.
Okay, so guess what? I have some good news for you. I just put together in my brain. This is like especially good news.
Oh.
I get you to move this way.
Yeah.
Okay.
That way, now that we have to share this, fourth person shows up on it.
Okay.
I think there's only 3 of us scheduled.
Yeah.
Last time, last.
Did somebody
like,
decide they
someone
wanted to
from the
come?
audience and sort of join, you know.
Oh,
That's
God.
fine.
You did that one
I
time.
did my time. I did.
There's another guy
Heidi
last
is
time.
here. We can go find somebody. I think our county would. My board member.
I don't even know what's this.
She's on recycling.
It's an environment. It's like how much time do we have?
And what's that subject?
How much time do we have? Environmental issues.
Oh, environmental issues. Okay.
And I think Ed is announcing it probably.
Right. He has his own
Oh,
mic.
I'm not at home. I'm about to do an environmental panel at UpCycle Pop Market at 7300.
Oh, there goes pieces of it.
You okay, Tim?
I thought if I'm okay, so why is the mic okay?
Well, first you, then the mic.
Yeah, I
Mic is
have no
material.
reason- I have no reason to be in
And
danger.
burners, lots of burners, and then
I have another Shure microphone.
live music. and
It's
live
okay.
You
music
need-
being done.
I just gotta put all the parts
Do
together
art
again.
and
No, this
it's really
is
cool. And holiday shopping from local artists. It's upcycled stuff, so it's
Eco-friendly.
eco-friendly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had this happen already once because.
Bad with buzzwords.
I'm just good because I've been
Okay.
hashtagging a lot.
All right. I just
I'm
wanted to tell you because
that's
this
what
thing is
hashtag.
really cool and it's free. But yeah, I
But I've
am.
been getting, yeah, like, have you had a moment to kind of walk around?
Oh, I walked in here and then I ran into the person I knew. I was talking to, so I haven't walked around at all. I wanted to.
Oh,
I will
no.
afterwards.
Okay. It's gonna start dying down after.
Yeah, so
Oh
I'm just sort of
my
like
God.
watching the clock. Like, oh, it's gonna go.
I'm so
Yeah.
Because I want to look around.
Here we are.
Okay.
Some people.
Okay, I'm so
Yeah.
sorry to hear that.
If not-
well, I get it then. Okay, I will talk to you soon.
I guess
my love.
nobody's interested in,
Drive safe. Bye.
that's okay.
They're all gonna come.
Okay, they're all gonna come.
Woohoo!
Look, it's in one piece again. Mic drop. There's an accidental mic drop.
Okay. So we can just have a conversation and we'll just have it all mic'd because I guess nothing.
That's
we-
the way it's working.
I'm moderating.
Hello, hello. Oh,
You're gonna say I can sit the
You're
moderator
moderating?
spot. I'll move. Are you moderating? Who's moderating?
Doesn't matter.
I don't know.
Go ahead.
We're supposed to moderate. Are you moderating?
I will moderate if you want me
Okay, good. You are.
I will not moderate if you want
No,
me
I
to.
got this.
I guess
Okay,
if
so
you
tell
want me
me-
to.
Y'all want what?
Okay, so we're gonna just talk.
Hi, Rachel.
We have a meeting. Questions.
I don't know if you're the stream is running.
Okay.
Let me start right.
Oh, yay.
Wait, we're being recorded?
Yes.
Woo! We're in space.
All right.
Okay, so you're gonna tell me some wonderful news first.
Oh, I'll tell you later.
Okay. Not streaming.
No.
All right, so we're streaming on the internet. Welcome to this panel discussion on how much time do we have left. The idea was to take the core of what Burning Man is. One of the principles is leave no trace, and how do we apply that to our urban environment? How do we, as humans, and not just burners, do a better job protecting our planet and leaving no trace? Shira has been a leader in this with her UpCycle Pop market. So we wanted to bring together some other leaders in our community to talk about how we do a better job with our planet. And so I'll leave it to Shira, and I'm going to step off.
Okay. Well, first I wanted to say that Thomas Hall from Clean Start was supposed to be here. And unfortunately, his grandmother died. So he had to step away. That happened today. So he could not participate. So we're kind of figuring this out together. So I run a market called UpCycle Pop, which is a market for upcycled and repurposed items. It's all about being eco-friendly and taking consumerism head on, which is, during the holiday season, we tend to buy a lot of stuff. It's like consumerism. Let me do that. Okay. It's consumerism on steroids. And I wanted to figure out, is there a way that we can do this differently? Can we upcycle things? Can we do this? And can we engage the artists that are within the community so they can also participate? And so we're not using the money that is going to China. We're keeping the money within our community. We're taking care of the items that are within our community. And it is pretty much bending the linear system that we currently are on towards a circular economy. So right now we're on a linear system, which if people don't know, linear system is, we extract, use, dispose, extract, use, dispose. This is the current system that we live in. And we have to start really thinking about, because dispose, we have a finite planet. We only have so many resources. And we're coming towards an age where it's like we're really seeing the impact of it. It's no longer just talk. So upcycling is it's a creative step towards circular economy, at least changing the mindset to start thinking about circular economy. And what circular economy is actually designing things from the start to continue to be in rotation, in use. So let's design something so we use it, it's used, but then it goes back and we can reuse it. We can reconfigure it into different things. So it's really thinking things a lot more through in the beginning stages and really rethinking our single-use addiction, I'm going to say. So yeah, this is UpCycle Pop. So go ahead, Sage.
Yeah, so I've been to this event once before, and it is very uplifting to see all of the upcycled materials here. This here is a necklace that I got made out of upcycled bike tire tubes, and I get so many compliments on it. Nobody can ever guess that that's what it's made out of. And these are tubes that once you get a hole in them, you just throw them away. There is no other purpose for them, for the most part, that anybody is thinking of, even much less using. And I think you have a great point, Shira, when you say that this isn't just like a fun concept, to think about anymore. This isn't something that's in the future. It's now. And I think one story that shows the severity of this issue is, the wildfires in California are greatly increased by climate change and extended droughts and its severe weather. And I recently heard a story that my friend's niece was in her classroom in high school, and their teacher got a phone call, and it was from her parents, and they were calling from the fire to say goodbye. And it was the last thing that they were able to say, and they did perish in the fire. And the students, were there for that phone call for just the few minutes that their teacher had with her parents. And this is the face of climate change. It's not tomorrow, it's now, and it's serious.
Yeah. Do you want to say who you are and what you do?
Oh, right. My name is Alexandra Ragan, and I work for the Environmental Council of Sacramento.
And what does the Environmental Council of Sacramento do?
We advocate for a sustainable future for current and future residents of the Sacramento region.
Awesome. Go ahead, take the mic.
There you go. So I'm Brandon Rose. I wear a couple different hats in my life. My day job, I work for the Air Resources Board, and I should say nothing. My opinions there are my own. I'm also elected to the SMUD Board of Directors, and I'm the immediate past president of ECOS as well. So I wear different hats. So my opinions are my own, but I really would echo, you're seeing this wave of climate change coming, and in any one weather pattern, any one weather storm isn't a pattern, but we're seeing where all of a sudden there's a lot more disasters going on. Fires are at much greater pace than they ever used to be. And I think there's that real urgency that's showing up.
So what's SMUD doing about it?
SMUD just completed a lengthy process this last year called Integrated Resource Plan. And that process, we looked at, the most important part of that process was looking at our 2040 carbon target goals for our power. And what we set, and this was just in the last month and a half, was a net zero carbon target for 2040. And so SMUD is on the absolute cutting edge of reducing our carbon emissions from our power plants. And part of that plan is to increase, to electrify transportation, which is code for electric cars, electric vehicles, and to also electrify homes. And so as opposed to burning natural gas in your home, which produces a lot of carbon emissions, you would move to electric, heat pump hot water heaters and those alternative technologies as well. And so that's really where the direction that we're hoping to move the Sacramento community in conjunction with the other local government agencies, counties and cities.
Cool. So what do you think is the number one thing that we should be addressing right now? And each one, we all come from different places. So you just talked about energy. What would you say?
And I think Brandon will agree. I know Brandon will agree with this as well. A lot of what the Environmental Council of Sacramento has been advocating for since the early 70s includes more infill development and smarter growth. So planning for growth that we know is going to happen as far as development occurring, but doing it in a more consolidated way with a stronger public transportation system, and making sure that we have a jobs housing balance in communities that we're building so that they're not forced to commute to and from their jobs and their children's schools and grocery stores. We need to build complete communities and complete safe streets where walkability and bikeability is possible and public transportation is very robust.
So what is happening right now and what needs to happen? So you talked about
Infill. So I should define infill. Okay, so infill development is when we're not building at the outskirts of a current urban core, but within it in parcels and properties that are already available, that have had something on it before in history, but are sitting there bare now. We need to build more dense housing in particular in Sacramento because there's a jobs housing imbalance. And so there are more jobs in the urban core than there is housing, especially affordable housing. So what we need to do is more of that infill development, creating places to live near jobs and near places to shop and children's schools. And that means inside the urban core, and also make a good amount of that housing affordable.
So are you so the city just recently released that any business that is within a quarter mile or half a mile within a rail station, they're putting on limits. Does that have anything to do with ecos?
Yeah, it does. So that's what we're calling the transit-oriented development ordinance. And within communities that already have a robust transportation system, so along the light rail gold line corridor, for instance, in Sacramento, which would include this place that goes along Folsom Boulevard, then that would create, it creates parameters for the kinds of businesses that be around that location. You want things that people will want to visit when they're on public transportation. So for instance, a classic example, it's been used as a car wash isn't something that's very beneficial to you as a person taking public transportation. But a place like this that you have, Shira, this is a great place to spend some time along a stop, and people on bicycles or on foot, it's a very welcoming place for them to spend time in. So that's kind of the gist of what we want to see next to transit-oriented, within the transit-oriented development ordinance, we want to see along transit corridors, places that people want to stop. If you take public transportation, you get off on a stop for a little while and there's nothing there but office buildings and What are some other good examples of things that you can't use? Just there's nowhere to eat.
Gas station.
Yeah, gas stations, exactly. Car washes. So what you want to do is you want to see a place to grab a bite to eat, and maybe a cafe, and maybe an art gallery, or a place to buy some things, But
And how is that connected to the environment? Because I mean, like in my mindset, my primitive mindset, it would be like
an impact on the environment. So the way that we plan our cities impacts how many of these fossil fuels we're using and how much carbon we're releasing into the atmosphere. And the more appealing and appetizing you can make public transportation, the more likely people will use it and the more likely they are to get out of their vehicle. And that's the biggest thing right now is we've got to get people out of their cars.
Well, let me add with that. I mean, Sacramento, after World War II, we turned into this suburban development pattern in Sacramento, and really across the country. And so when you live anywhere outside the central core, you have to drive to get to these places. And that's really where we're looking to when we're talking about a sustainable community is what does that community look like? And a big part of that, and when you look at some of the most effective ways of reducing your own personal carbon impact is to be able to live car-free, or at least car-free as possible. Doesn't mean maybe you don't Uber places occasionally, or if you're going on a trip, you rent a car, but the ability to walk out and within, a quarter of a mile or mile to get all those services you need is what Alex is really talking about.
So I'm going to say something that nobody wants to hear, and that is, everybody's talking about car emissions, but car emissions are not everything that cause global change, right? And so I'm going to talk about, because I come from the place of it's also what we eat. Animal agriculture has a huge footprint on global warming and the climate change that we're having. It's also how we grow our food, and the livestock that we have to anyway, I can go on and on and on. Is there any talk or anything on that, or is SMUD and ECOS only focused on transportation, kind of like direct personal transportation?
So the way that ECOS works is we have experts in every area for the most part. We've got a really strong brain trust. So if you want to talk about food, our food experts within the Environmental Council of Sacramento, a nonprofit, are vegans, and they work with the Sacramento Vegetarian Society, and we put on Sacramento Earth Day every year, and all of our food vendors are vegan. So when it comes to any environmental issue, we consult the experts, and that's what our food experts tell us to do and the example to lead, even if we haven't all gotten there ourselves in our personal lives. That's what the expertise says to do.
Absolutely. Let me just, it says the reality of is growing our food supply is incredibly water intense. And so if you're growing the grains to feed to the cattle so you can have a nice steak, it's all the water for the plant and the animal. And so people really don't realize just how much water production is taking. And then even when you look at that water that's being used, it's creating, using electricity to clean that water and put it into our water supply as well. So it's much more complicated than that, but it is very true. One of the easiest things that people are concerned about their carbon footprint is to adopt the vegetarian or lifestyle. Although I personally, I eat meat. Well, I don't eat a lot of meat, and usually poultry. And so there's different.
Flexitarian.
Yeah, and then during the drought, we talked about what crops do our farmers grow, what crops are most water efficient versus not. And you see with climate change, we have more variability in our water cycle.
Right.
And so some years we have a lot of rain, other years we don't have much rain at all. So it really is that we talk about needing to be resilient and adaptive. That's really where it hits locally.
Does anybody here have questions environmental questions? Yeah, Jody.
Okay, so I think one of the things
Wait, I think you need a mic. Make sure everybody at home can hear you too.
Hi. Okay, so I think that as individuals, we would all like to help. So my question is about recycling. This morning, I had a robust conversation about the recycling bins at a place that I was at. And we had a bin for trash and a bin for recyclables. And in the recycling bin, was a plastic container, like an apple container, a juice container, and it had some water in it. And I think there was a peanut butter jar, and it had a little peanut butter in it. And then there was a sign that said the plastic spoons couldn't go in there. And then someone said, if you live in X place, they can go in there, but not at Y place. And so I wanted to know, like, how can an individual take care of the recycling better? And is there anything else that individuals can do with the recycling except to get it straight?
So I'm going to start, you guys can totally pick up on this. Recycling really depends on the region that you live, because it depends on who has the client to pick up. So for example, in Los Angeles, they recycle styrofoam because they have somebody that can pick it up. Here, they're very limited in what they can recycle. So right now it's pretty much aluminum, clean cardboard, glass, paper. The thing that really is, again, it's like very located. You have to kind of look and see who's picking up your recycling and see what they take, and that constantly is changing, because just recently, I think it was just last year, China no longer accepts our recyclables, and we're going to have to start taking care of our own trash. China's not just said no to America, even though America's recyclables were the worst because they were the dirtiest. Nobody knew how to do it. They were putting dirty pizza boxes in their recyclables, and this is not recyclable. If you're contaminating the whole batch if you put a pizza box in there with oil. And so we have to start rethinking, and I think a big thing, which I'm sorry that Thomas is not here, because he really works with organizations that are Clean Start, that help things like this. But we have to start investing in organizations that are going to be recycling here and locally, because we don't have enough of it here in Sacramento. So I'll let you know.
Yeah, so also Assemblymember Kevin McCarty recently spoke at one of ECOS's events, the Environmental Council of Sacramento. It was the Environmentalist of the Year Awards. And what he mentioned was his struggle as a father with his two young twin daughters. They know the concept of landfill, recycling, and compost. And yet when they go eat somewhere, I think it was a Chipotle or something like that. What? Okay, maybe I shouldn't use a specific example, but they were out to eat at an establishment and they were very confused, these young daughters, because there was only a garbage receptacle. And they said, well, what do we do with our recycling? And even what about compost? So I do think that Assemblymember Kevin McCarty will be coming out with something soon on a statewide level. At least he'll be trying to propose a bill that addresses this issue and requiring public establishments, eating establishments at least, to have 3 receptacles, which is really exciting. And based on his record, I wouldn't put it past him to be doing that. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
I don't have a whole lot to add. I know from an energy efficiency perspective, recycling is really efficient. When you compare it to, you need to pump oil out of the ground to make plastics versus melting it down and repurposing it. And when you run the numbers, it's like 10 times more efficient. It's surprising. But the Chinese, they changed it so your recyclables had to have less than 1/2 of 1% soil being dirty, and so that's why it excluded most recyclables, because it just can't get it.
Can you repeat that, please? So
it was 1/2% was the maximum threshold for their imports.
okay.
Right. So anything that
To
was
be contaminated.
anything with soil. So they didn't directly ban it. They just made the standards so tight that it was basically impossible to meet. And then a lot of that waste diversion, you've seen stories in the news where they're stacking all this stuff up. It's gonna a lot will end up going to either landfills or end up in an incinerator, and they'll end up being burned, unfortunately. So it really is, there's been an entire industry created around the world, and it's completely been upended in the last 12 months because of these changes, and they really came out of nowhere.
Yeah, so I think, and then a big thing about that, and why I'm going to go back to circular economy, is because we need to start looking at that as energy and not as trash. We need to start looking at that as input, as stock feed, as depending on what sector you work in, you're going to call it different things. But we need to look at that as kind of like, no, this is precious. Let's not put it back. So yeah, and I think a big issue is education. I think a lot of people don't know. We have here the Recycle Challenge little kind of setup here, which is a lot of people don't know that you should not put your recyclables in a black plastic bag. Because then when it gets to the recycling center, they're gonna think that's trash because it's in a black plastic bag. Also, don't put plastic at all because that goes clogs into their system and they have to stop the whole thing that backs it up.
Meaning the plastic that's like plastic bag, one-time use plastic.
Yes.
Yeah. So not plastic in general that has a number 1 through 6 in it. It's okay as long as, you know, you've cleared the peanut butter out of it, as you mentioned. But when it comes to the kind of plastic, like for instance, a plastic bag ban was really instrumental in helping with those machines that process our recycling here because it was stopping the machines, those plastic bags, one-time use ones, like 6 times a day. And so imagine the energy going into stopping the whole thing and restarting it. And then another thing that, you know, just as an example of small things that people don't think about, if you open like a child's toy, the back part of it is cardboard. Okay. So that's recyclable as long as you haven't spilled vegetable oil on it or something accidentally. But the front of it, the plastic covering in front of the action figure or the batteries or whatever it is, that's not recyclable plastic. It doesn't say 1 through 6 on it. That's plastic that will only clog up the system if you try to recycle it. And that's why I know that Shira has talked about this as well. We need to stop wishful recycling. We can't just say, I mean, I've actually had a friend tell me sometimes when I throw something in the recycling bin, I think, you know what, you guys just need to figure it out and make it work. And he just throws that kind of stuff in there. And I go, you know, you're really hurting the whole system. We can't make that work until we've made this work. Numbers 1 through 6, plastic, etc.
I totally agree. I think a big thing that we need to do is we really need to focus on educating people more. I think really people don't know, and I'm open to ideas because I have a production company and I'm more than happy to help make that happen. Yes, you got a question?
I have a couple questions.
Oh.
Well, I don't want to go to wait on this path, but we were talking about like recycling, and you know, there's a lot of areas that use single stream now, and so they have a way to sort it somehow, and it's probably a lot of labor, but maybe that's the way everything's going. Is that rather than people, you know, having to think about sorting, that it does get sorted out at the waste waste facility.
Right. I'm sorry.
Can you clarify your question? I'm a little confused.
Oh, so well, some cities do single stream where there is no separate recycling, where it gets sorted out.
Mixed recycling. So you put your
not only mixed
paper and your-
recycling, no, but even everything, waste and everything goes in one, just like traditional.
Roseville and putting everything in the garbage bin. Yeah.
So they do pick out the recycling, or try to, at least somewhere. So,
but here's the problem with that is that it gets contaminated a lot more. And
Yeah.
so really the amount that you can recycle out of that is a lot less.
is it okay?
Yeah, it's a way less. And so what they do in other places except for the United States, because we're about convenience, not about
Yeah.
what's best. And so what they do is we separate, like, this is for glass, this is for plastic, this is for paper, and then it's a lot easier to recycle. Everything is kept a lot cleaner, and then people actually care more. But if you're throwing everything into one, and your mindset is like, well, if I'm throwing everything into one, they're going to figure it out,
Or like, okay, let's say, so I have lived in Roseville before. Here's what drove me crazy. I come home with my 6-pack of Blue Moon, let's be honest, 12-pack, and there's cardboard, right? That's recyclable cardboard. If I live in downtown Sacramento, I can put that in the recycling bin, and granted that there's not soda cans from my roommates full of other crap, it's not going to be contaminated, meaning that cardboard's not going to be soaked with other materials. It's recyclable. But if I live in Roseville, I have no choice. It is a land of less choices when it comes to recycling, because now that little piece of cardboard is going into the garbage bin with everything else, along with my broken eggshells and egg yolks and coffee grounds and all that other stuff. That cardboard is no longer recyclable.
Yeah. So that's a problem. So that doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay. I think
my bigger question is back to the title of the talk. How long do we have? what's the range and what are we measuring? I mean, if we say we continue in the current way, when do we start running out of raw materials? When do those raw materials start becoming prohibitively expensive to, to mine, basically? And we can never achieve 100%. What's a reasonable, target goal? Because we're not going to ever achieve 100%.
100% of what?
100%, recycle, circular economy.
We're not,
Yeah.
but I mean, like, if we can get
What
to
target goal?
80%,
Okay.
that's amazing. Like,
Okay.
we just have to start thinking about that. I'm sorry.
We have a new panel member. Her name is Selena.
We're not, but we have to start in the direction. I don't know if in my lifetime, we're going to get there, but
Yeah.
we have to start steering the boat in that direction, because if we don't start, because right now we're heading to the iceberg.
And where is that? And when is that iceberg happening? Is it 50 years from now? Is it 300 years from now? Is there any clue of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we were to continue on the trajectory that we're on now, we're seeing too much of a global temperature rise for survival of humanity within the next 100 years, I would say. And if
Okay.
if we were starting to do much better at our carbon emissions and absorbing carbon into old growth forests and so forth, then we would do better than that. And if we were to stop all carbon emissions tomorrow, including, the use of plastic, which is a carbon emission, and mining of fossil fuels from underneath the ground, and reduces carbon sequestration from the air into the earth, climate change would still be happening. So the train has left. It's snowballing. Everything we can do preserves the species of humans as much as possible. It's already happening. There is no stopping it. It's only slowing it.
So if we got carbon emissions down, there are other issues also that recycling helps.
Yes.
It's
So
not
we've got to
just-
get carbon sequestration as well.
Yeah.
Carbon emissions is no longer enough.
Yeah.
There's so
Let me say this, though.
Okay.
We talk about carbon emissions. I mean, there's lots of other
yeah.
greenhouse forcing gases out there. And so methane is an excellent example. And so we have these
Cattle,
methane.
Yeah.
A big chunk of it's coming from enteric cattle gas, which is cow burps. Methane leakage.
Dairy industry.
Dairy, big methane hotspots, but just leakage coming from the different pipelines. And natural gas pipeline takes methane, and methane is 20-25 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is. It has a shorter time horizon in the atmosphere than carbon does. So
It
even
stays
if
longer in the atmosphere, yeah.
there's a lot of different gases, and there's CFCs as well. So it's a little more complicated than just carbon emissions.
absolutely.
Okay.
So there were two other questions. There was a woman here and a gentleman here.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions about education. I lived in my own house in Sonoma County for a long time, and now I'm in a townhome. And I mean, recycling's been going on for a while, let's face it. But what can we do in this county? I mean, I'm in it, with two dumpsters, one for recycling, one for trash. I'm constantly taking pictures of the crap that's in there. I mean, clothes and furniture and people. I used to have a toy business. I would get 500 Lego boxes. You slice the damn things up, people throw their total Amazon boxes in the dumpster, and like in a day, you can't, that doesn't encourage people to recycle when they can't, get in there. So I'm just wondering, I'm always writing to the board and sending pictures and things, but what could we do in the county? I think apartments and townhomes and those kind of places really, really need education. I'm not sure about homeowners. I mean, it seemed, because you don't really know till you see what everyone else recycles. But I'm just appalled by the stuff that I see in there.
I can say this, I work at my day job, I'm at the Cali EPA building downtown, and I look in our recycling bin, and you see all kinds of soil materials, and these are professional environmentalists, and they don't seem to have any idea that you actually need to clean the yogurt out of the cup.
Yeah, well, it's clearly people don't know.
It's going to go back to what we were saying. It's going to be the education component.
I think there needs to be like a really big push on education. I mean, and if that is coming out with like a large campaign of like, I'm happy to work on that campaign. If anybody is here, I will work on that campaign, and I will work tirelessly on it. I think we really need to educate, because I see the people that live on my street and they're just putting things in, and it frustrates me. And people just don't know, and I don't think we're doing enough outreach to do, like, I'm happy to take my installation anywhere. I will take that installation.
The installation she's talking about. Can I talk about it for a minute?
Yes.
Okay, so next door in this room next to you, you will see an installation that is interactive where you can guess, okay, is this something I can put in the recycle bin or not? I would like to point out I got a perfect score from the bat, but I work for the Environmental Council of Sacramento, right? So I know that the pizza box with the oil on it, it's not recyclable, and plastic that's not 1 through 6 is not recyclable. And so you really have to, be in the know to know. And that's what Shira is talking about with her installation. There's just 8 items to identify whether or not you can recycle them. And people do not know. I tell my friends all the time and they are shocked. They say, oh, it's cardboard. And I had someone else the other day who said, after the Environmentalist of the Year awards, there was a gentleman who said, oh no, now that there's food on that plastic, it can no longer be recycled, even though it was a number 1 through 6 and it can be recycled. It just needs to be rinsed off.
Yeah.
So we had a board member take it home to rinse it off and put it in her bin. But in his mind, once food has touched it, you cannot recycle it. There's a lot of misinformation circulating out there.
And I have two short points. One of them, point that you made, like maybe, reaching out to schools and kids would be a great way to get that going because they're going to tell their parents, no, you can't do that. The other point is I recently got a cat dancer for my cat, and I was really impressed with the packaging because the packaging said you can recycle this, but you can't recycle the front. And I thought, wow, that's really responsible packaging because for any dummy that doesn't know what to recycle, there it is. You can't recycle that. I thought
Thank you for reading.
First of all, I love cat dancers, and I just purchased one from my cat owner friend for Christmas. They are amazing. They're the best cat toy ever, and I have not seen that message on there. I will have to look for it.
So, yes, you want to.
I think some good opportunities when you're talking about local government taking actions within, climate action plans and sustainable community strategies, where there really should be in there, where it says we're going to set up ordinances that require signage in front of recycle bins that will go through here's the basis what it can or cannot go in. And so I think there are opportunities for those structural changes to be put into local laws and ordinances.
Okay, awesome.
We've also had fines for, not in this area, but other cities have had fines for how dirty their recycling is or how much recycling they find in their garbage. I forget which one it is, but it's the next level beyond rewarding for recycling is punishment for not recycling properly.
That becomes difficult because then, like you say, because you put out your recycling. So I live in a house, I put out my recycling, I go to work, and then I come back and it's empty. I don't know if my neighbors are going to be using my bin and putting in their trash. So the punishment system, I think, is not good because it's not exactly fair. I think it needs to be more reward driven and not punishment driven. And I think that is how we can do. I
think that's a good point.
I mean, there's also organic diversions out of your garbage as well, and composting and
Yes.
alternatives to that, and don't put things on your garbage disposal because then the wastewater treatment plant that puts out a lot of organic material as well as it breaks down. So.
awesome. Do you have anything? Because I know we have to wrap this up.
So what I was taught when I was a kid that everything I put down in the garbage disposal is good because it fertilizes the farms. Is that not true,
No,
Brandon?
It has to get taken out at the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay, so
Otherwise, yeah,
don't do that. Like my mom said.
nothing should go down your sink except water, by and large. Right? You shouldn't. That's the sort of the latest,
Scratch
greatest
fruits.
for last
Oh,
10 years.
really? Nice.
Okay, is it true that you can put scrap? Is it true you can put scrap foods in your yard waste bin?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I've heard.
That's what I do.
Well, not like meat and dairy, but like anything that's compostable, you can put in your yard waste bin, which nobody knows about.
Oh, I do.
That's a secret.
Yeah.
I still have been like, is that true? It's true, you guys. It's true. Yeah.
Yes.
Rotten,
yes.
rotten vegetables.
Vegetables and stuff like that have gone bad.
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, just not meat or dairy.
No. No oils. I don't think oils. You can't put oils in there.
Okay.
But then, yeah, because that goes to fertilize and stuff like that. So.
I mean, that'll just break it anyways.
All the things we hear.
Hey, thank you guys for listening. It's been great to have an audience here.
We have a unicorn here.
Oh, look at the unicorn.
Thank you so much, everybody. We're gonna have to wrap it up, but thank you so much for attending. Thank you. Awesome.
Selena had a last word.
That's on, power to on, and then mute to on.
Power on.
Did I turn it off? I didn't think I did.
I mean, you've arrived at your destination.
I was keeping it from doing it. There you go.
I tried to be a flight
test.
attendant. Oh, Lord. I was not tall enough. Bye-bye. Don't you want to fly with me?
You weren't tall enough?
No.
Oh, I thought you
It's
had
terrible.
to be kind of petite to be a
No.
flight attendant.
Petite. You got to reach the overhead bins
Oh, you gotta reach
safely.
the overhead bins.
And they felt I couldn't do that. And I said, I can in heels. See? I'll climb on the chair. It'll be fine. Move over, sir. Just move your leg a little. It'll be fine.
All right, so
How you doing?
I'm good. So we're gonna start this.
We're going to give it a go.
5, 4, 3, 2.
And welcome. Major Sexy Pants. Let's talk about it.
Right. So again, my name is Major Sexy Pants.
My name
Ed-
is Pamela.
Ed Fletcher in the default world, and the conversation we're having today is about sexual expression in the age of consent. We envisioned a larger panel, but these other chairs are empty, so it's going to be a conversation between the two of us about this topic.
We're going to make a lot of eye contact, I think, while we talk about it.
We are. We don't know who's moderating or who's
And
leading this conversation, but
Yeah. I don't
we'll
even
figure
know
it out.
what questions to ask and who we're asking.
So why don't you introduce yourself first? Tell us how you got on this panel, and then I'll do that.
Well, my name's Pamela. I am involved with this panel simply because Shira Lane, who is part of Unleashed Productions and UpCycle Pop, invited me. I think that one of the reasons I find myself on this panel would be I'm an artist, and I think that when you create art, you immediately have sort of a level of exposure of self that other people who don't openly create art, you're kind of on an in, is how I feel about it. So I think that just contributing to a conversation about how do we safely and appropriately make sure that when we're expressing ourselves through art, that we aren't, I guess we have to worry about offending people. We have to worry about our sort of exposure being something that we want across the board with the digital world. I don't even know what to do. So I'm excited to sort of chat about that with you because I feel like you can probably give me some insight.
I don't know if it's insight, but it's opinion or maybe things I've gathered. 4 years ago, this would not have been a panel that I would be any remotely near. But I came across this sort of crazy story about the 1969 trial that helped write the rules for exotic dance in California and eventually elsewhere. And that's led me to a lot of interviews and conversations with people that are in the burlesque world, in the strip world, and producing a documentary called Do the Dance about this trial. And we attempt to sort of spin it forward then and talk about what's changed since then, 50 years later, and where do the rules sit. And the other sort of context for this conversation is that Burning Man has for a long time been sort of this bastion of like anything goes. And before cameras were prevalent, there was a lot more
Anything went.
nudity. There was a lot more sex
Let's just
acts
talk about it.
happening.
Okay.
And that's sort of been curtailed to a small extent or modest extent. And there's also this concept of consent, and people have been pushing consent as the 11th principle for some time now. And we're trying to sort of turn the corner on the era where you would just assume that everybody wanted a hug or any ass you could slap and just call it good. That we need to be mature about these things and make sure that the ass is acceptable for slapping
Exactly. Thank you.
before you go.
We need consent for the slap from the ass before we slap it.
Normally the ass is attached to a human.
There we go.
Probably got ass to human.
The human. Well, and a little bit. Well, we're talking about the age. We are live. We did say ass. Uh-oh. Sorry, audience.
I think we can say ass.
Okay.
As a producer, I brought to the word
Was that-
ass, pussy, vagina.
Vagina.
Fuck.
We've all the hurdles. All the hurdles, all the barriers are down. Because here's what's important. You're in a safe space, number one. It's virtual, number two. And here's the problem. This is what I have a challenge with, because I work in an arena where when consent hasn't been given and harm has been done, and women specifically need to either recover or heal or find the word, have justice for an injustice when consent wasn't obtained. So I think that if we can't even have a conversation where those words are used, but we're willing to violate those body parts regularly in specific demographics, perhaps it's okay to say pussy. Perhaps it's okay to say vagina. Perhaps it's okay to say any of those words. And maybe part of the problem is we need to really be saying them a lot more to each other in a way that's saying, I kind of want to slap your ass. Is that okay?
I think to me that would be progress. I thought
There we go.
in
Let's talk about it.
1994, I was an exchange student. I lived in Sweden for a year, and growing up in Orangevale, it was pretty much of a shock when you get there. And
Sweden.
everybody knows, everybody's seen Basic Instinct. There's the scene of Basic Instinct where she does the leg cross there, and that was like in America, that was like the biggest, craziest thing that you've ever seen in a movie. They played that in the commercial on Swedish television.
Nice.
And I was you can show a vagina on Swedish television. And what I got from that was that in Sweden they were a lot more comfortable with sex and sexuality, and even in their environment it was more acceptable for a high school student or gymnasium student to have a sexual relationship and be able to tell their parents about it, and them not having to sneak around and have unprotected sex.
Well, and I think one of the benefits, right? If you can create an environment where the truth can be told, maybe we don't need details about textures and volumes and movements. We don't need details, but we need to be able to have a safe dialogue. And I think that's one of the things in our culture that I'm experiencing as a person who works with youth. As a parent myself, I'm experiencing where there's sort of a fear simply of the dialogue. How do you even talk about these things without, I don't know, we're afraid we're going to overexpose, but then our children have access to this digital world that is limitless. And there's all kinds of vagina on the internet. I checked. So how do we think that by not saying these things out loud in the real world that we're, what are we doing by not being willing to talk about it at least?
I certainly hope things have progressed, but I doubt they have. I never talked about sex with my parents. We learned about sex in my court when one of our friends found the Joy of Sex book in their parents'
under the
bedroom,
hidden.
And then everybody went on like a raid mission to go and raid your parents' house, find as many sex books as you can. Let's bring it back. Let's learn what we can. And Eric Hawking found his mother's vibrator.
Oh no!
And that's how we learned about Eric's mother and
her habits of self-care. By the way, so I do think that one of the strange things for me is we live in a culture that I can't go outside really without some form of sexual something, even in my home, on television, on YouTube, any platform you're on, we're inundated with it. And it's sort of this elephant in the room all the time. But when you openly express it, then it gets weird. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
Right? There's a culture where it's okay. Burning Man, right? You can express yourself in a very openly sexual way. You're saying previously this was much more prevalent, we'll say. Once we were able to start sort of capturing that, people started to tone it down so others won't see. We want to hide it.
And I think that was both a beauty and a sort of foible of the Burning Man experience, that people would go there to do things outside of their normal culture car
Sure.
and like, oh, I can be as free as I want.
Sure.
As long as there's no cameras, as long as nobody tells my boss.
Right.
You're in a way you're striving towards your truest self, but you haven't reconciled your truest self with your regular existence.
Well, and I think we live in a culture of duality right now where people are totally okay with being one person in sort of, I want to say in the real world, but in their social world. You can be any persona you want to sort of project, and you never really have to reveal unless you want to. And I think we live in a culture that allows that kind of fosters that has perfect opportunity for that. And I think it's in the art world where you really see people who have a genuine willingness to step out and to show themselves and to expose themselves. And I think that for me, there's a fine line with when we think of consent. The digital age makes it hard because once the cloud has it, there's no stopping it as far as I can tell. And I don't know the consequence of that 10 years from now, 15 years from now. I don't plan to run for office, so frankly, I don't really care. And I think that we live also in a world in the digital age, it's kind of a blessing and a curse, or it can be, where you might, by exposing yourself, you might turn off a whole group of folks. But the blessing in that to me is that those probably weren't your folks. And so if you expose yourself in whatever way that means, on the scale of what you personally are willing to consent to, you kind of have to know. You have to know right away. If you're going to expose yourself and it's nudity, you have to know that if that goes in the cloud, you don't own that anymore. If you give consent one time, that may be consent that you 30 years later wish you hadn't given, but you did give it. And so it's hard to kind of, with the digital age, wrap around what consent means, what exposure of self means. How are we going to really know what the consequences are 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when we're exposing very small children who are constantly with that device recording, containing their information without their consent, but sort of with it, because that's what our culture is kind of influencing.
So let me take
That was a lot.
Let me take the most sort of purely bohemian stance on it. Wouldn't it be cool if we all just got over it and it wouldn't be like a big deal? That it wouldn't be a big deal that Congresswoman Jones, that we have pictures of her boobies? Like,
here's the thing. Did those boobies breastfeed children?
Sure.
How old are those boobies?
I don't know. Let's say the boobies are 40.
Is she considering a boob
Let's
job?
say that
How are her
boobies
boobies
now
doing at 40?
But she took these pictures when she's 20.
I bet they look way nicer now than, or the picture. I'm sure she's happy about those pictures, don't you think? In a way, right? Maybe she doesn't want everybody to see them, but at least they're not pictures of her boobs at 40. They're pictures of her boobs at 20. It's a blessing.
But I think
gave
most
consent.
people would perceive that their political career would be harmed if those pictures got out. Now, the pure bohemian would say, like, why are we all worried about this? Like, let's all take dick pics and share them, and then we'll all be equal.
Sure.
And then
catalog
we
'em.
don't have to worry about it anymore.
I'm
I don't
kind of
know.
okay with that at this point. Well, and here's the thing, right? Why is her political career in jeopardy? Because she did what basically every 16, 17-year-old in high school Snapchatting their ass left and right. I said ass again. How can we still be focused on that? We have so many other issues to take care of that I'm glad that there's photos of her breasts. Maybe she's not glad that there are photos of her breasts. But when we stop there, that's the problem I have. When we stop there and we want to focus solely on that, I think that it's a really easy way to clog up a system. It's a huge distraction where we can look at that and we can judge her for that, but let's talk about her policies.
I agree philosophically.
Thank you. Because the bohemian in me also agrees. It says we're going to need to get over it.
Tim, what's going on? Sound?
Little sound check. I love having a conversation with this man.
Same time. Okay. There we go. Okay.
Your shirt's amazing,
question.
Tim.
I think that the elephant in the room here is that,
Ooh.
and it's easy to not see, living in California, is that there's a big part of the country that has kind of religious puritanicalism kind of runs how they think about these things, they perceive these things. And that probably is a lot of the reason why people can so easily be shamed by situations like this. So what can be done, or what do you feel can be done to reduce that influence? I mean, you're not going to make religion go away. So, and will simply the prevalence of everything on the internet in 20, 30 years mean that people just won't care as much? Because it just, as things have happened in the last 50 years, you think about what things were like in the 50s, where you couldn't even be seen in bed with someone, on TV, right? And how it's progressed to this point. So maybe we think about this now, and 20 years from now, it's just not going to matter to that congressperson that, that got exposed now on the internet.
That's
if they run for office 20 years from now.
Yes, thank you. I thank you very much for bringing up the topic of sort of the conservative nature, and it really it's a mindset, and it's a learned cultural sort of, I'm going to say, phenomenon, because as time goes on, we see wax and wane of how culture does and doesn't, and it is very progressive on the West Coast. I actually work
and in Europe, the way Ed mentioned, it's like
Yeah.
Europe has been like that for a long time, right?
They
Isn't it?
have. I actually experienced my younger years and early years of parenting in Europe, where we would go to like a bathhouse, and in the locker room, everyone is nude. We're in the family one because I've got a little one chasing around, and everyone's nude and everyone's fine with it, and it's not sexualized. And I think this is the part where, in a former life or in a future life, I would be very comfortable to be a nun and forego my sexual nature just because. So I kind of I like conservative values and views, and I do sometimes struggle with overexposure, where I don't want to necessarily see her breasts while we're in a meeting. Time and place are very important, but once consent has been given, if later someone is trying to use that exposure inappropriately, and then they're trying to call in her value over that, to me, it really casts a strong shadow of, if we're really honing in on our religious values and we're really calling into place our truest self, we're not going to cast judgment on that person if she possibly has made a mistake. And what I think happens is it's used as a very strong deterrent to distract us from connecting to something that might be of actual value. Because we can look at someone and so quickly degrade something based on something that's so natural and so human. And I think everyone goes through what I'm going to refer to as a Rumspringa. Everyone goes through a season where you've got to find who you are. Every creature on the planet has a sexual nature. Surprise! It's not, it's not something to hold on to a humanness about, because even animals figure out how to copulate and reproduce. But I think that trying really to ensure that when you are making a conscious decision to consent to something, knowing how it will affect you later, that's maturity. And when we have a culture that can't just respect when someone has made an immature decision, or we do use a religious standpoint to cast judgment, I think that that's where we get caught. I think that's where we get stuck. And I think that's where connection can break one from another. And I think that's truly, it's just a mistake. And I'm not of the nature that's going to go to Burning Man and expose my body and have group sex. I'm just not. That might be something that happens in the past. I know. In the past, you'll be fine. You can edit that out later. In the past, if there's things like that are, but here's the thing. It's real. It happens. If we're offended by it, by saying the words out loud, don't go to the party. But some people do, and it's okay to talk about the fact that some people do and go like this, that's not for me. But some folks are doing that, and how can we make sure that people are still able to do that in a safe, healthy, and respectful way? And I think that if you're not a person who would partake of that, if you're not a person that would find pleasure in that, if that's not for you, judging others because it is, they're working something out. Let them work out whatever they're working out. That's their life. That's kind of why I think I align with the idea of burning off energy, that if it's not for me, I can recognize what is. If I've given consent and later regret that I did, it's my maturity that has to stand up and say, uh-oh. But please don't judge me, because when I was 17, I did do things like, woohoo, because I was 17 and I had boobs and they were new and it was kind of exciting, right? Because I'm a human being. And I think there's a big part of whether it's your religious belief, whether it's your cultural belief, whether it's your age, whether it's your lack of maturity, where a lot of folks just really need to go, wait, but we're humans. Wait, but we make mistakes. Wait, but that's fun. Wait, but no one's going to get harmed because I exposed myself or because someone saw my nipple. You can show your nipple, but I can't show mine. Will you show your nipple for me?
Gladly. Getting back to Tim's question.
Thank you.
If you look at the span of history, you would still believe that over this time, we're leading towards more and more freedom where that doesn't matter as much. Gary Hart, his political campaign was ruined because he had an affair and the media found out about it. We currently have a president that's had multiple affairs.
He's a busy guy.
Whether this period is an aberration remains to be seen, but I think over the span of time, we're seeing less and less castigation of people for those things, especially if you admit it up front and you're like, oh, when I was young and wild, I did some young and wild things.
There you go. Nothing wrong with that.
A pass out of that, but it doesn't change the fact that there are a lot of people in this country that still want to see, in their mind, that protecting women, protecting people from mistakes or exposing themselves. And, you know, in some ways, it's a continuum from Christian conservancy to what's happening in the Middle East and their level of how we
Protection.
protect women.
Ooh, let's talk about it.
The hope is that you could eventually get to a point where women could choose to celebrate their bodies,
Perhaps.
and also not be objectified when they're not trying to be.
Yeah, well, and that's okay. Do I need protection? Here's what happens for me sometimes. Energy is a funny concept if folks don't know about it. And if you don't know how to use your own energy, it gets a little wiggly, meaning it can get uncomfortable. And when you're trying to have intimacy or connect, someone may mistake, because of their own needs, desires, or their own energy, that you're having sexual energy when you're not, right? If I'm exposed and I'm naked, if I'm just sitting here and we're talking, first of all, it'd be cold.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be a little chilly. And then it's not, for me, I just think we get really stuck on sexual.
Right. Well,
Sexual.
people, yes. The society today says if there are parts exposed, we must be there to like have sex.
Right.
This must be sexual. I went to my first nudist event as a journalist. And,
As a journalist, solely.
And I was writing about nude spots in Sacramento, and I arrived at the beach, and they said, if you want to do this interview, do you mind like
You gotta get
joining
naked.
us?
You just take it.
And I was like, well, I guess I shouldn't be a hypocrite about these things. So I
Took your sexy pants
I
off.
took my sexy pants off. And
How'd that feel?
it's whew,
What?
whoa, yeah.
There's a lot. It's a big word.
As a man,
Yeah, it's a lot.
most of the time your penis isn't shown unless it's in operational form.
Functional form.
Functional form.
It's always
I guess
functional.
It's always functional.
Multifunction.
So it was like, it's humbling to expose yourself in a flaccid state.
Well, okay.
I think women always look great naked.
There you go. Thank you.
Maybe not.
We do too.
But for men, it was a different thing. It was like, okay, all right, humble yourself. Here we go. Pretend like you don't care. Pretend like you don't care,
Oh
pretend like you don't
no.
care. And And
Just
then
act
you
cool.
gotta be like
Eyes up
face,
top.
eyes on face, eyes on face.
North Hemisphere.
Because
North
the
Hemisphere.
tendency is to, like,
Oh.
I'm not used to being able to see that, and your eyes go
Sure.
straight down, and then you've got to go like right back up. And that's sort of the same thing you experience at Burning Man when there are people around that are in various states of undress. You've got to retrain your mind to like
Penis is a hard one.
look at the eyes.
Well, I didn't mean to say that, but I did. Penis is a hard one because we don't expose the penis. And we're going to go there. I've had this experience where my biological mother explained she was very young when she was a mother, and she was very, very exposed. She was a person who was trafficked. So she was sexually exploited. What she explained when she became a mother was they took a class to explain what was going to happen for pregnancy, but it was all teenage girls at a high school level. We know this as like continuation school, that kind of thing. When our girls get pregnant, we pull them out of high school, we give them special stuff, right? Because they're special now because they're going to be a mother. She said 3 girls in the class who were pregnant. In the book, that was the first time looking in the reproductive health book at a photo or like an image of a penis. They were pregnant and they didn't know what a penis looked like. Hello. Right? So let me bring it down, because when we talk about body exposure and we talk about a penis, we go to sex, right? I'm going to take it back down. Remember the boobs we talked about earlier? Did those boobs feed a child? Did those boobs ever protest in a peace march? They're body parts. And because we've mentally assigned them as sexual reproductive organs, we hold on to that word. And then when we're exposed, there's a hard wire in our brain that says sex, and it starts glowing. And so I think even for folks, when we come from a religious point of view that says, we shouldn't expose, or we shouldn't see that, or it's sinful to have those acts or any of these things, but it's part of our nature. And when we can't have an open, safe dialogue, when children don't see their parents in the nude at a swimming pool while they're changing their clothes, and we keep it in this really like, don't look kind of way, it's doing something mentally to people where you have to feel uncomfortable inappropriately about your body.
Right.
Not okay. Not okay with me.
Just to take it back to Sweden one more time.
One more time.
American locker rooms, men would grab your towel as soon as you're
Cover.
cover yourself, run to the next spot, whatever. Sweden, they were just walking
let it
around.
hang.
It was like shocking, and then I had to like pretend like this was normal for me too.
Don't look.
Whatever, I'm comfortable too.
See, but there you kind of have a different kind of confidence, because everyone's walking around like it's no thing.
Mhm.
Here you're trying to be like, don't look down south, don't look down south. I don't know. There's a fine line for me where I'm not necessarily comfortable with overexposure. I don't want to have to get naked. I don't know. I want to cover the hoo-hoo mainly for hygienic reasons. I want to stay covered as best I can, but
Acceptable on the internet.
it's impossible for it to not be acceptable on the internet. It's impossible for it to not be acceptable on the internet.
It's you've got to black it out on Instagram.
Should we have an age of consent on the internet so that 8-year-olds aren't able to Google someone's hoo-ha? How do we do that?
It's tough.
It is
The
tough.
funny thing, and
So
maybe
glad
we
Tim's
gotta go
here.
back to the way the child views it. He's just asking me if I can smell his farts.
Amazing.
So,
See?
it's like we just got to go back to that level of lack of inhibition. And
There you
not
go.
think about it as anything more than that.
Well, and here's the reality for me, right? We laughed when I met you. I laughed because I said I'd like my identity to be identified as lavender with sparkles. I'm a Ravenclaw, and I'm Marcus sexual. My partner's name is Marcus. That's it right now. That's what we're doing. I'm not able to really identify all of these sort of nuanced things about my sexuality. I'm pretty old-fashioned and kind of probably boring. I'm with a partner who we're so intimate that, yep, I can tell you when he farts when we're in a crowd. That's not very sexy. It's not very sexy, but he's still my sexual partner. So how do you go from being where I'm looking at you being like, don't be sad when you're in Sweden and you have to expose your pee-pee. It's okay, because I'm over here being my 5-year-old self acting like I don't see any penises because this is really uncomfortable. That's how I feel. I just don't want to look at anyone's sexual organs unless I'm having sex with them. how do we go from being an adult who's sexually charged with all of this experience? How do you go from being a raging hormonal teen with all of this unexperience and being a 4-year-old when your body just works and you don't know how or why exactly, and then you learn how to use it really well? How do we get a culture that can openly accept that we're sexual creatures, but we have a very human nature that farts?
We've got to unteach some of the things that have been taught to
Yeah.
us by society. A quick story about Burning Man this year. We had 2 kids in our camp, and one afternoon, there were some other kids, some kids visiting us, and the bar is open, people are coming by, and this like pair of naked people come to the bar, and they're hanging out, and they get a drink, and I look over at the parents, and the parents are fine. I look over the kids, and kids are fine, and so I'm like, okay, keep going. And then they start spanking each other.
The naked people or the children? Okay, not the children.
I look over at the parents again, and they're not reacting. I look over at the kids, and they're not reacting. And then it's like, well, no harm, no foul. And I think, in a way, those kids' values are going to be different than their classmates. And I'm not going to say whether that's good or bad. I'm not a parent, but they're probably more able to have a conversation about sex and sexuality and not be as caught up in boobies as I am.
The words. Yeah, I think that it's important too, right? That dialogue of being able to have it. I don't know. I think these things are really instilled in during the teenage years, and when you kind of open that doorway into your sexual exploration, I kind of sit on a fence here where I'm like, I think you kind of need to go through it with someone, but who you go with, how do I say this? However those words work out. The fun part, I said that wrong because my teenage daughter is listening to me.
Oh.
The fun part is that when you get to explore sexually, you don't always just have to have one partner that you walk through it with. And that's really fun. Because I think that when you're really young, it's hard to understand what you're going to want, what you're going to like. I think as a female, I was always taught that someone was going to take my virginity. Nah, bro, you're going to have to earn it. Why is that not the dialogue I heard? Hello. And I think culturally we live in a world that's very sorry, fellas, but I'm not sorry. It's a very male-pleasing world. I'm a very well-trained woman on how to please a man because that's the world I live in. It's very advantageous for me to know how to use the wide plethora of my skill set. And I know that being a pleasing woman, being a kind woman, being a quiet woman, being a sexy woman, right? That list can go on and on. I know how each one of those labels will serve me in a setting. And I think that sexuality is something that is sort of glorified and, what's this word? Ravished and demonized all at the same time. It's like, if you're not sexy, then you don't have a value. If you're too sexy, then you're a slut or you're a whore or you're, negative things. So we can't make a line and then expect people to understand when to cross it, when not to cross it, when it's a value, when it's not a value. The hard part for me is that the same people who are going to judge the congresswoman, or correct me for whatever her title is, whoever's going to judge her for having exposed herself, they're also going to have their own vice of what they seek out of exposure that they want. And I really feel like everyone lives in a glass house when it comes to sexuality, because dogs hump legs. So I just want to be clear that no one should be casting stones when it comes to sexuality. And if others feel comfortable exposing themselves, it's that judgment piece that really wraps me up, where I feel, how do we get past, if someone is consenting, let them be. Let them be. If you don't consent, try hard to understand that what they're going through isn't what you're going through. If you don't want to be exposed, don't expose. And then don't go seeking after what is being exposed so you can rile up about it. Right? There's got to be a bit of to each their own. Yes, Tim.
Sorry.
Don't be sorry.
So I'm hearing a lot of how, our own values as being adults that aren't, 20, is getting into this conversation right now. Do we have any sense of how current teenagers think about this? And maybe it really is very different than how we think about it and the way we were brought up and the way we value things and the things that are inhibitors for us. Do we have any experience? You know, have we
Should we
talked
ask a
enough-
teenager?
Have we talked enough to, teenagers to,
We have a teenager in the audience.
okay. Well, she wants to talk about it. I don't know. Yeah, it's not.
Well, yeah, I think one of the things I've experienced as a parent is political views aside, I just want to say that we have someone who for the generation who's upcoming, right, 20 and under, that's a celebrity. That human being was known as a celebrity, not a politician. And so if I tell you that Cardi B is also a celebrity, Nicki Minaj, how did she come up out of ATL? On a pole. On a pole, which first of all, that's an athlete. I just want to say that. That's an athlete. So I think that the pop culture is gen pop is how I say it, like general population, right? I think that they don't understand the difference between what I'm going to say is like virtual reality or like social media world and real life. It's all meshed into one weird Kardashian thing that's going on where people have really lost boundaries in gen pop. People have really lost boundaries of that could have consequence later. I think that there's an older generation that really, and I'm kind of at the tail end and I feel in between where I don't want to have to care anymore. If my nipple gets out, my nipple gets out, everyone. It's happening. If my nipple were out because I was feeding a baby, it's not inappropriate. But somehow, if it's out for any other reason, it must be sexual. So
no, that nipple out while you're feeding the baby is inappropriate.
It's
For
inappropriate.
most of America, which is
Right.
absurd.
It doesn't make sense when you're just trying to be a person. And so I think that the younger generation, from what I'm experiencing, is so saturated in it, I don't even know if they know the difference. I really don't know if they know the difference. And I think that they're not thinking because their frontal cortex isn't as developed as it needs to be, but they aren't thinking about their future prospect when they're Snapchatting that dick pic. They're just not. And this is one thing that's happening. Statistically, STDs, pregnancies, things of that nature are going down because they're living in a virtual world. They can have virtual sex. They can text each other and show pics back and forth. People are using pornography and virtual stimulation for substitution of that physical contact. That's a whole nother conversation we don't have time for. Yeah.
Sexual expression in the age of robots.
Oh, yikes. I'm not ready for that one. That's a lot.
We're getting close to our cut down time here. Any questions from the audience? From anyone other than Tim?
It's been fun.
Yeah, this has been good. Yeah.
We need to talk about sex more often.
Yeah.
Should we just podcast this out?
Ready.
Your beautiful glasses.
Thanks.
Those frames.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to, I was just thinking of my grandnephew. So my niece had a boy, he's two and a half, and his name is Lev Adventure
Nice.
Grashton, and Grashton is a mashup of their last names.
Mashup. It's amazing. Does he have a
Grashton
hashtag?
and Ashton, so it's Grashton.
You could just do that?
They did that. They just
Wow.
did that.
No one told me.
And it gives me chills thinking,
Yeah.
you can do this. You can create your own reality. And he showed up for Thanksgiving. He had glitter jelly boots
Pedicure? Oh, boots. Ooh, nice.
and a dress, a silver. It was almost like, it might even be too big for you, but it was kind of this big dress.
He was
And he
adorned
was
and
so
ready.
cute, and he was so happy, and nobody made a thing about it at all, or good, bad, or indifferent. I think it's great that we're opening up to not.
In the 80s, we would have said he's a 2-year-old cross-dresser,
Right.
but now he just came over,
Yeah.
right? It's just his outfit.
Yeah.
He probably felt fabulous.
Probably helped it happen in California.
True.
A lot of America that would not have gone over as well.
Yeah.
I don't know how to wrap this
I
up.
know.
I feel like in a way we're making progress. In a way we're kind of stagnating.
Well, do you know what I do know above all? For me, the thing is I know that we can't go backwards, and I know that the future is not here. So right now, I find it really, really important that people understand that our visual preferences are made up, right? What I prefer to wear, even what I prefer to say, how I prefer to say it, the volume at which I say it, the colors I choose, the things I choose to express myself, they're just made up. And when we are coming from any perspective that would chastise or bring negativity, whatever that negativity could be extrapolated out to hatred, out to violence, if you don't like someone's preference, we may be at a point where we have to, for a minute, keep that to ourselves so we can get the work done. And I think the hard part for me is that culture wants to stop at judging a preference of someone, of what they wear, of how they behave, and we can't then connect and get to the root or solve a problem. So for me, if you came to a board meeting and we were like being really professional and there was this grant and we're talking about all this really important stuff, and you were wearing this, most of, America, corporate society, other folks, they'd have a problem with that. If this is what you wore and we could get shit done, let's get shit done. I think stopping at people's preferences of what they're wearing, how they express themselves, we really have to focus on time and place, right? Is there ever a time when a 2-year-old can't do whatever the hell they want? 2-year-olds are ruthless. They're going to wear it. They're going to do it. But I think the maturity of self as we become adults and as we age into the world, it's really about learning that there's an opportunity for time and place to express yourself however you want. You really have to be advantageous for your own benefit. You really have to know, when's the time and place? Are these my people? If these aren't my people, then I should find where my people are so it's safe for me to do what I want to do, so others aren't necessarily offended if I do it, right? You don't want to go into a board meeting without your sexy pants. They're not gonna fund you if you do that. They might, I don't know, your industry. So, I don't know, I feel like we should talk about sex more often. This has been fun for me.
This has been fun, and I think
Have to do a lot of editing.
to a large degree, society doesn't talk about these issues enough, and I'm glad we talked about it. I look forward to living in a world where people can express themselves free of judgment, and that if people choose to sexualize their bodies or their expression, they can, but it doesn't sort of come back to haunt them. There's no sort of judgment or repercussions of it, and that's a lot to ask for. But
is it? No.
It shouldn't be to ask for.
Yeah, let's let it not be.
Okay, all right.
Let's tell everyone to calm down a bit, right?
Let's everybody calm
Who
down.
hasn't had sex and who doesn't enjoy it?
Unless you're a
Let's
minor,
just- and then wait, because
Then
your brain
wait.
needs to develop and we need to keep you safe.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's important. I think understanding that we need to protect children. I think that women are yelling really loud to say, hey, we want to help you protect. We might not need as much protection as we used to need.
Mhm.
And we're ready to take our nipples out and and join the fight. I don't quite understand why our bodies have to be different than your bodies. So that inclusion where everyone starts to really just respect your own, respect each other, wait for consent. I think that's important.
I will let your words be the final. Thank you very much.